Hello, this is Callie Duritsa-Boswell, and I am a doctoral candidate as of, March of next year in history with an emphasis on art history at Liberty University. My specialized interest is presidential history and First Lady history, particularly that of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt. And this is a public history presentation, a mini documentary on the hidden heroines of the Monuments, Fine Art, and Archives. So this is on Nazi looted art rescue and restitution. Okay, so what were the stakes? So it's the end of the war. It's the summer of 1945, and Ohrdruf and Auschwitz are being discovered and evacuated, and the war in Europe is winding down to Victory in Europe Day. Hitler and Franklin Roosevelt have just died in April of 1945, and at this point, the cellars and the castles of occupied Germany held millions of objects looted by the Nazi regime: paintings, tapestries, church treasures, entire libraries. And returning them was, of course, not the work of the generals, although the generals did support this work. It was in large part the work of a handful of curators who were turned soldiers, analysts, and diplomats. And we know those through the popular Robert Edsel book, as well as the George Clooney movie of the Edsel book, The Monuments Men. So the origins of the Monuments Men program emerged from the Roberts Commission in 1943. It was dedicated to the protection and recovery of artistic heritage during wartime. Its full name, the American Commission for the Protection and Salvage of Artistic and Historical Monuments in War Areas, reflects its mission. Officers not only safeguarded monuments from destruction, they also operated post-war collecting points in occupied Germany, addressing the urgent need for restitution and preservation of cultural treasures, including what you see on the left, which is an image of returned looted art. It is by Claude Monet, a pastel bord de mer, circa 1865, and there are hot links embedded on all the pages. The black and white picture is a page of the MFAA archives. And of course, this is a presentation on the women of the archives. That archive on Fold 3, as well as at NARA and as well as the National Gallery of Art, is actually called the Ardelia Hall collection, although there has never been a single academic paper to discuss her work. So this will be changing that for sure. And of course, I think that the dissertation has just evolved to do just that. So who are the women of the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives? Before I say that, I wanted to say that the image embedded in the back is Vasily Kandinsky. It's from the public domain, and it was stolen. And its recent sale set a new record for a Dutch museum. And it had a long legal battle. The painting was eventually returned to the great-grandchildren of the owner. And they later sold it at auction for the figure of £37.2 million. Okay. The women of the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives. So popular narratives, as we've just discussed, emphasize the contributions of the men, overshadowing the significant roles of women and what they did for the restitution of the looted art. And that included the preservation efforts as well. So Ardelia Hall, after the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, would be the longest running member. Women like Edith Standen, who was the only one to sign the Wiesbaden contract, and we will get to that in just a minute, earned a Bronze Star. And Ardelia Hall was a curator from the Boston Fine Arts Museum in MoMA. Ardelia learned Chinese. She took a sabbatical and she learned Chinese, and they were both essential in field operations as well as policymaking, ensuring the safe return of looted cultural treasures after the war. Their efforts highlight the importance of recognizing women's contributions in historical contexts, challenging the existing narratives, and advocating for a more inclusive understanding of art restitution history. Before computers, Ardelia Hall returned an astonishing 4,000 artworks to their rightful owners. Here are the photographs of the women of the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives. Captain Edith Standen, she was a lieutenant prior to this. Ardelia Ripley Hall. That's really the only photograph we seem to have of Ardelia. And Rose Valland, spy at the Jeu de Paume. Okay. The women would staff the field. They staffed the policy desk. They also were key at the collecting points in occupied Germany. And for Rose Valland, she's got a lot of paperwork and even some movie parts that her character, historical actor, has played. So for Rose particularly, she had a very dangerous job because she was one of the women that was recording the stolen art as it came in for the Nazis. So she was, in essence, a counter-espionage spy. Okay, Edith Standen, iconic art collection secretary. Her journey began in 1929 because she was the secretary for a prestigious art collector, Joseph Widner, showcasing her incredible organizational skills. She meticulously cataloged one of the finest art collections in America, a collection that was later gifted to the National Gallery of Art. Her military service in 1943, she joined the Women's Army Corps, transitioning from the art curation to wartime efforts, highlighting her dedication and versatility in challenging times. In 1943, with the world at war, she joined the Army Corps, and by July 1945, Standen had reached Europe and was assigned to the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives section, moving with the occupying army through Frankfurt, Hochst, Wiesbaden, and finally Stuttgart. Her field recovery efforts. So the images are key on this page, except for my fanciful use of David, but the archival documents. So what you're seeing there is Edith Standen's actual diary, given to me recently by the National Gallery of Art archivist. In fact, Edith Standen's papers are out right now, being photographed and digitized, and they will not be returned until September of 2026, when I already have an appointment to view them. In the meantime, the archivist has sent me the full transcription of the diaries, as well as other interesting articles like the one on the left, which is from Janet Flanner, who was a New Yorker columnist, and then, of course, the cannon. In Stuttgart, Standen tracked down a 16th century bronze cannon stolen from the Musée de l'Armée in Paris and helped return Westos's altarpiece to St. Mary's Church in Krakow. In August 1945, she joined other MFAA officers in signing the Wiesbaden Manifesto, also known as the Wiesbaden Contract, a formal protest against the U.S. Army's decision, which they were very much forced into because Europe was in a horrific state, right? Russian were coming in, pillaging, raping, stealing, and Berlin was divided. And so there was not a lot of hope that all of the hard work that they had done in finding these looted treasures could then keep them safe. So the Wiesbaden Manifesto was a formal protest against the U.S. Army's decision to ship 202 German-owned paintings to America for safekeeping, a decision the signers believed would destroy German trust in Allied restitution promises. Okay, here is the Wiesbaden Manifesto. This is an image from the Cleveland Museum of Art. In August 1945, the MFAA officers, including Standen, she was the only female, protested against shipping German artworks, emphasizing the need for trust in restitution efforts. And she was the only one that signed it, the only female signer, and that was a really big deal. The artworks did include items from the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Berlin, including Rembrandt's, Rubens, Titian's, and shipping them to Washington, D.C. under the stated rationale of safekeeping while Germany's future remained uncertain. Remember, this is the time of the Marshall Plan, so all of Europe was basically starving. So it was a formal protest, and it was written by the MFAA officers at one of the biggest collection points, which was the Wiesbaden collecting point. And the draft was by Lieutenant William Leslie, who said that he felt like Thomas Jefferson writing it. And he stated that the removal of the works of art from the country in which they belong for any reason, however well-intentioned, is unacceptable. It was a direct challenge to the Army's authority, issued by officers who knew the chain of command would not be pleased. Why it happened. The officers who signed it had spent months rebuilding German trust that the Allied occupation was not simply a new form of conquest. They had watched as the Nazis justified looting with exactly the language the Army was now using, safekeeping. They believed correctly that if the United States removed these paintings, no restitution argument the U.S. made in the future would be credible. Edith Standen said it plainly in her 1989 oral history that I showed you the photograph earlier. The transcripts were part of what the National Gallery of Art sent me, that the whole thing was undercutting everything we were trying to do with the Germans. Edith Standen was the only woman to sign it. The manifesto was signed by the officers stationed at Wiesbaden, and Standen was the only woman among them. She drove to Munich with Charles Parkhurst to gather additional signatures there, and then she later wrote a personal letter stating that she would never accept employment at the National Gallery of Art, which she and others believed had been the institutional force behind the transfer. That letter is in the historical record, and it was not passive. She put her name on a document that could have ended her Army career. The paintings were eventually returned to Germany in 1948 after a national tour of American museums. And the episode exposed the central moral vulnerability of the entire restitution project. The same government trying to return stolen art had for a moment tried to keep some of it. That's not actually true. They didn't really try to keep it. As we said, the Marshall Plan was there. The entirety of the continent was starving, and there were bigger fish to fry. And I think that this was truly a way to be helpful, but we can talk more about that in a minute. I did want to go back to the national tour. So one of the interesting things that I found earlier on in this process is that here, it's Victory in Europe Day, and the death camps and the concentration camps, which numbered into 45,000 death camps across Europe and Russia. Those camps were being evacuated, and what had really been happening for years was finally being seen. And as a bright light, as these museum curators found the artwork, they would bring it to a local museum or a local village hall, and they would let the soldiers walk through and see the artwork and the cultural treasures that they had fought for, which I always thought was really lovely. So the importance of public history and women's restitution is ensuring that their stories are preserved. At left, we see a screenshot image from the Monuments Men and Women .org. That's the Robert Edsel Museum and his website. And recovering their stories is itself an act of preservation. The paper trail survives in the National Archives record groups 226, 259, 260, ironically titled the Ardelia Hall Collection, despite there being no academic articles on the person herself. And I think that that's something that I'm hoping to remedy here soon. So public history's task is to make the archive legible. And even though they are remembered in the personnel files, we have their efficiency ratings. The opening page of this presentation, there is the declassified OSS file for Ardelia Hall. It's important to build the restitution system that has basically been lost twice, and that is the women that have helped. And of course, Ardelia Hall was the longest standing member, as we did say. Okay. So Ardelia Ripley Hall, a pioneer in Asian art scholarship. So she published groundbreaking studies, including a notable 1934 work on Islamic pottery, establishing her reputation in the field of art history. Her curatorial research experience was extensive. Her references were the creme de la creme. She had 12 years at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, as well as at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Hall developed expertise that significantly influenced the understanding of Asian art collections, and her transition to intelligence analysis was due to the fact that she took a sabbatical, as we said earlier, to learn Chinese. Her recruitment by the OSS showcased her adaptability, translating her curatorial work to intelligence analysis during a tumultuous time in history. So her file was at one point labeled top secret. It was interesting to go into NARA 2 in College Park, Maryland, and see the original file and have to put the little umlaut in there that had the declassification numbers. So in April 1943, she was recruited by the OSS, transitioned from her curatorial experience into critical intelligence work. She was actually working the radio transcripts. Her appointment involved research for the Far East and China. And remember that China was at that time actually our ally. So that is something critical to remember, although China was basically in a civil war, if you remember this. And Japan was certainly a threat to them. That was the Burma War, which we found out not too long ago that TWA and the Burma War were actually helped along by American forces. So there was a lot of ways that we were desperately trying to help them form a democracy, if that's what they so chose. And it ended up that is not the way that things went. So her efficiency ratings were upheld in 1945, and she had impactful contributions, although there were some misunderstandings, and reading her files was in some part sort of like that TV show, The Office. It was a little bit comical, and that she got dinged pretty badly for things that weren't even her responsibility, and later had to request that her files were scrubbed and more accurately portrayed. And that did eventually happen. Okay. So we talked about her wartime assignment in China. Okay. She was the Far East radio intercepts. She was analyzing psychological warfare. And then she transfers over to the MFAA in 1945 when they no longer need women, right? So the women are out of the OSS, and those jobs are reserved for veterans that are returning home, and primarily for the men. So at this point, something interesting happens, and we talked about this before, when they took all of the soldiers, and the MFAA curators took all of the artwork and the looted treasures, and they would sort of commandeer a village hall, whatever was big enough, and they would put all of these things out for everybody to see before they went back to their respective homes. And it would say compliments of General Eisenhower, compliments of General Patton. So here's a quote by General Eisenhower from his speech at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1946. It may seem strange that a soldier representative of the science of destruction should appear before a body dedicated to the preservation of creative ideals as expressed in art, and should be urging support of the Metropolitan Museum. I believe that many of our veterans have gained renewed interest in art and the world of the artist. And he went on to say a lot more. And if you remember, Eisenhower was an amateur painter. When he was at Columbia as the university president, he had a whole penthouse studio. And of course, Winston Churchill was a painter. And so I do think that there was other things there, although he claims to not be of the artistic temperament. Perhaps it could be argued that in that transition period before he was seriously considering running for presidential office, then maybe he did have a little bit of that, because it was noted that he spent the majority of his time in his painting studio in the penthouse. Okay. The recovery of Nazi plundered art continues today. On the left, you have a picture of Amedeo Modigliani's Seated Man with a Cane from 1918. This is from the website lootedart.com, and the link is on the bottom. Dealer David Namad was given 30 days to return the Nazi-looted Modigliani painting, and this was in the art newspaper 17 June 2026, which is exactly 10 days ago from my filming. So that right there tells you that this is still a hot button item. It's a hot topic item. And one of the things that Eisenhower talked about in that speech, as well as things that General George Catlett Marshall also discussed, was the need for protecting the monuments and the precious items that couldn't be moved. For instance, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, which miraculously survived a bombing. So when we think about all of these things, it does, I think, emphasize the compassionate nature of our military, and that, the first role really always is the humanitarian, the compassionate, the universal diplomatic, which I think frequently is buried, unfortunately, under their armor. On the final page, you may screenshot this bibliography. I would copyright it if I could. Because this is all brand new research and no one's ever done this work, I hope not to see it in anyone else's papers. And this bibliography is very comprehensive. Well, thank you so very much. And for protecting my work and protecting my vision of where this is going to go. And I hope that this has helped you consider the role of the rough and ready soldier in Europe. And I thank you so very much for your attention today. Take care.